The first man kicked for nearly 40 seconds. The wire held. His feet didn't touch the ground. And when he finally stopped moving, the next one was already swinging. June 9, 1944, midday in Tulle, France. A steel town wrapped in hills and narrow alleys. It wasn't a battlefield. No trenches. No tanks. Just balconies, factory chimneys, and silence broken by boots on cobblestone. But by evening, 99 Frenchmen, workers, students, retirees, dangled in the hot sun like scarecrows, hanged by the SS Das Reich Division, who'd stopped here on their way to Normandy. Not for strategy, for punishment. They pulled the men from the crowd in the factory courtyard. Over 1,200 were forced in there. A handful marked for deportation, others for death. Some tried to beg, some stared straight ahead, and a few ran. One made it out, bullets chasing him through alley turns he'd known since childhood. The executions were public, deliberate. The SS used what was available. Telephone wires, lampposts, window bars. Took hours. The town square became a message board. This is what happens when you resist. This is what happens when you kill Germans. 3 days earlier, French partisans, Maquis, had ambushed a German column near Tulle. Killed about 40 men. Captured some. It was guerrilla work. Rough, desperate, local. Payback for years of occupation. But retaliation from Das Reich wasn't surgical, it was surgical theater. The goal wasn't to eliminate threats. The goal was to scare the soul out of the living. By dusk, children walked home with their heads down, afraid to look up at the bodies that still hung in front of their homes. And behind one of those windows, someone wrote a name down. Not everyone in Tulle was broken that day. Some were remade. One of the first to swear revenge wasn't a soldier, he was a teacher. Another was a mechanic with blood on his sleeves and a Maquis contact hidden under his floorboards. One more was a young woman whose brother swayed from a church lamppost. Her message came years later, written in a file buried in post-war archives. This wasn't official resistance. Not yet. This was memory fermenting into purpose. The names of SS officers began circulating. Lammerding, Barth, Kahn. Some faces were remembered. Some were guessed. Most were marked for death. Across the country, stories like Tulle were multiplying. Oradour-sur-Glane would come the next day. 642 massacred. Their village left in ruins as a monument. But Tulle was unique. It was cold, organized, and left visible. The wires didn't lie. The hangings were counted, witnessed, photographed, and then avenged. What does revenge look like in a country occupied, then liberated, then diplomatically handcuffed? Not fast, not loud, and not legal. It started with lists. Intelligence passed through back channels. Names gathered, addresses whispered, identities cross-checked. Then came the hard part. Finding them before time or politics could bury them. Some SS officers disappeared into the fog of post-war Germany. Some were protected. Some were caught and tried. Others vanished, until a resistance survivor knocked at the door. A few died in gunfights. A few just disappeared. This wasn't about due process. It was about reckoning. And the question never stopped echoing. Who deserved the rope next? Before the wires, before the nooses, there was just a town. Tulle sat folded into the hills of Caries, its river Caries threading quietly through old stone bridges. Before the war, it was a place of work and habit. A place where the biggest sounds were factory whistles and cafe chairs scraping pavement. Its population hovered around 15,000. Men who built weapons, women who cleaned rail cars, children who ran between shops with paper-wrapped bread. But in 1944, the war wasn't knocking anymore. It was inside. The Germans had held France since 1940. 4 years of rationing, informants, curfews. 4 years of young men disappearing into the resistance, or disappearing for good. 4 years of looking over your shoulder before you said anything about the occupiers, the SS, the collaborators, the betrayals. By June, Tulle wasn't quiet anymore. June 6th, Normandy. Allied troops storm 5 beaches. A crack in the occupation opens, and the French resistance hears it like thunder in the distance. They begin moving fast. Maquis units, once scattered and scared, grow bolder. Sabotage operations light up the countryside. Trains derailed. Bridges bombed. Roads ambushed. June 7th, Tulle becomes a flashpoint. Maquis fighters, some only teenagers, ambush a German convoy inside the town. There's no elegant tactic. It's street by street, shot for shot. About 40 German soldiers are killed. A few captured. French losses are heavier, but the Germans retreat. And for 24 hours, Tulle belongs to its people. That night, the resistance celebrated with caution, because they knew what was coming.
June 8. SS Panzerdivision Das Reich Division.
Das Reich had a reputation, forged in Yugoslavia, sealed in Eastern Europe. Veterans of mass reprisals and anti-partisan operations. And they were on their way north toward Normandy to crush the Allied invasion. But they didn't rush. They paused. Punishment came first. Commanded by SS Standartenführer Heinz Lammerding, the division deployed into Tulle like it was enemy territory. They sealed exits, rounded up men, and set about their cleansing with precision. Lammerding didn't give speeches. He gave orders. The rationale was simple. Kill civilians to make the resistance think twice. The irony? The Maquis had already pulled out. The hangings weren't reprisals. They were theater. They were warnings nailed to the town's conscience. The day began with arrests. German soldiers, aided by local collaborators and a few reluctant French police, forced all able-bodied men, roughly 2,000, into the courtyard of the local arms factory. Surrounded by rifles, machine guns on rooftops. No trial. No appeal. From the crowd, 120 were selected. The process was arbitrary, said some. Others said it was alphabetical. A few believed it was based on physical condition. Younger men could send a stronger message. The truth likely lay in a sick blend of all three. 21 were sent to forced labor camps in Germany. Few survived. 99 were sentenced to hang. Balconies became gallows. Telephone wires pulled tight between iron hooks and window grates. Some nooses held. Some snapped. If a wire broke, they tried again. The SS made civilians watch. Children. Mothers. The priest who tried to intervene was nearly shot for interfering. Only spared because an officer changed his mind mid-sentence. Each hanging took time, and each one left a memory that would grow teeth. And then they left. The division rolled out toward Limoges, en route to the front. But they left behind more than just the bodies. They left the smell, the photographs, the widow who never found her husband's body, the father who came back from forced labor only to learn he'd lost both sons in the square. They left 99 reasons for a lifetime of hatred. And somewhere in the ruins of that day, people began to plan what would happen next. Because the hangings weren't the end. They were the start of a hunt. They didn't wear uniforms. The men who hunted the SS didn't come with medals or briefings. They came with scars. They came with names memorized like prayers. And they came with silence, the kind that grows in the shadow of 99 swinging bodies. They were teachers, butchers, ex-soldiers, railway clerks who never looked the other way again. Some were maquisards, part of the resistance cells that had fought the Germans in the woods and mountains since 1943. Others were civilians whose brothers, sons, fathers had been picked from the crowd in Tulle and left dangling in the June heat. Their grief had no flag, but it had direction. First, they made lists. In the weeks after the massacre, Resistance Command began gathering intelligence. Not just local, national. Survivors of Tulle were folded into cells under the Bureau Central de Renseignements et d'Action, BCRA, the Free French Intelligence Service. British SOE agents, Special Operations Executive, offered help, contacts, weapons. The Maquis already knew the faces of some killers. SS officers didn't hide in Tulle. They commanded in the open. Names came fast. Heinrich Wolf, Gerhard Barth, Otto Kahn. But one name sat at the top. Heinz Lammerding, the man who signed the death orders, the man who'd ordered Oradour-sur-Glane burned just one day after Tulle. He became target number 1. But how do you kill an officer protected by his own country? Lammerding survived the war, captured by the Allies, interrogated, then released. He went back to West Germany and rebuilt a life in Dusseldorf. Civil engineer, quiet, untouched. France wanted him extradited. Germany refused. Their constitution, forged in the ashes of war, forbade extraditing German citizens for foreign trials. A bitter pill. The man responsible for 99 hangings in Tulle and 642 deaths in Oradour lived freely under the protection of the law. So others took the law into their own hands. 1946 to 1952, resistance cells tracked former SS personnel. Some were captured during post-war purges. Others were executed without paperwork. You won't find those names in court archives. You'll find them in memoir footnotes, old letters, whispers across kitchen tables. One former SS sergeant, identified by survivors as present during the Tulle hangings, was found dead in the woods outside Toulouse in 1947. No trial, no note. Another officer's car exploded on a quiet road in Lyon, blamed on mechanical failure. A third vanished crossing the Pyrenees. He was never found. Each case opened with rumors. Each file quietly closed. They weren't just killing Nazis. They were killing ghosts. For every rope in Tulle, someone wanted a name to pay. That's not justice. That's grief with a compass. Even Charles de Gaulle, the architect of Free France, understood. Publicly, he urged reconciliation. Quietly, he allowed some of the purges to go unanswered. A war like this didn't end on a battlefield. It leaked into basements, alleyways, train stations. The French government wanted order. The French people wanted something else. Retribution. One man, known in resistance circles as Paul L., lost his brother in the Tulle courtyard. After the war, he joined a network tracking Nazi war criminals. When West Germany denied France's extradition request in 1953, Paul traveled to Dusseldorf. What he did there never made the papers. But Lammerding suddenly required a police escort, and Paul returned home with a fractured wrist and a blood-stained coat. No arrest, no trial, just a long, cold look at a man the courts wouldn't touch. Some say Paul tried to kill him. Others say he just wanted Lammerding to see his face, the face of the brother he'd left hanging from a factory crane. This wasn't just revenge. It was a message in reverse. The SS had left their warning in Tulle: resist and you die. The vengeance men left theirs across Europe. We remember. And some memories come with a kill switch. The post-war years were chaos in slow motion. Europe was rebuilding, but the blood hadn't dried. Trials opened, big ones, public ones. Nuremberg, Dachau. But not every war criminal sat in a dock. Some slipped through cracks. Some hid in plain sight. And some were protected because their secrets were useful. But the vengeance men didn't wait for courts. They kept working the list. Gerhard Barth, SS officer, present in Tulle on June 9, 1944. Witnesses saw him laughing during the hangings. After the war, he went underground, falsified documents, changed towns. But by 1950, he resurfaced, managing a transport company in Hamburg. A French intelligence contact tracked him down. The file shows surveillance for 3 months. Patterns, addresses, habits. No arrest made. But in 1951, he was found in his apartment, shot twice in the chest. German police called it an unresolved burglary. Nothing was stolen. Just one name, scratched into the wallpaper with a key: Tulle. Otto Kahn, SS non-commissioned officer. He helped select the 120 men in the courtyard. A survivor remembered his boots, polished black, blood-slicked by the end. Kahn escaped to Argentina in 1946 under Vatican ratlins, with papers forged by pro-Nazi sympathizers in Italy. By 1955, he was living near Cordoba under the name Karl Metz. French agents petitioned for extradition, denied. Too little evidence.
No fingerprints. No cooperation.
But 1 year later, Kahn's farmhouse burned to the ground. The body was identified by dental records. Cause of fire: Unknown. Local paper called it an accident. Resistance veterans quietly passed the story through bars and train cars. 120 names. 120 chances to be found. But Heinz Lammerding was different. Standartenführer. Division commander. The man who signed the hanging orders. He never fled. He never denied it. In fact, he used his real name, lived openly, and even ran for local office in the 60s. In 1951, a French court sentenced him to death, in absentia. But West Germany refused extradition. The French protested. Nothing changed. Lammerding claimed he'd been tried and cleared by Allied tribunals. The Germans stood by it. For the families in Tulle, it was betrayal carved in policy. In 1961, rumors spread that ex-resistance fighters had crossed into West Germany. Not to kill Lammerding, just to find him, watch him, let him feel breath on the back of his neck. Nothing happened that year. But in 1971, a pipe bomb detonated outside his engineering office.
No casualties.
No claim of responsibility. Police blamed anarchists. Survivors of Tulle blamed memory. And what of justice? In courtrooms, very little. By the 1970s, most war criminals still alive were old, protected, or politically inconvenient. But in the margins, in the footnotes, the reckoning continued. Some of it came quietly. The wife of one former SS officer testified in secret in 1983. Said her husband couldn't sleep. Kept a pistol under his pillow. Said he cried in his sleep, repeating the number 99. Other reckoning came late. In 1990, an aging French intelligence archivist anonymously published a file, codename Resistance Reprisals 1945 to 1965. It contained 37 names, dates, operations, and locations, all tied to former Nazi personnel. Most were dead. A few had simply vanished. The file was quietly removed from circulation within days. And through all of it, the town of Tulle endured. The wires were taken down. The gallows dismantled. Streets renamed. But the memory remained embedded in concrete and silence. Some families moved. Some stayed. A few kept scrapbooks, yellowed newspapers, blurred photographs, death notices. The vengeance men never asked for medals. They asked a simpler question. If a state won't defend its dead, who will? One by one, the names faded. Bodies buried. Houses sold. Files sealed. But in the corners of Europe, in cigarette smoke and creased photographs, the rope still swung. And the men who pulled it, some died quietly. Some were chased across continents. Some were caught by names written in notebooks by men who'd never forget June 9, 1944.
Grief arges fast.
But memory digs in and waits. In Tulle, the dead were buried by the end of that week. But the town never really put them to rest. Not entirely. Some families held private ceremonies every June 9th. Others never spoke of it again. And the children, the ones who watched their fathers lifted into the air by SS rope, grew up in a silence thick enough to drown in. Most never talked about revenge. But they remembered who did. Some of the vengeance men didn't survive their work. A few were caught on other operations, raids, cross-border runs, disappearances. One man, Henri L., was arrested by French police in 1948 for possession of illegal arms. He never named names. Served time. Died alone in 1962 with no pension, no plaque. Another, known only by his resistance codename Clovis, disappeared in Austria. His family said he'd been hunting a former SS logistics officer last seen in Salzburg. All they found was his coat, torn and burned, in the woods north of the city. The revenge was never free. It cost men years, sanity, sometimes their own families. Their stories weren't honored in books or medals, just passed down in whispers. The state didn't sanction it. The law didn't protect it. But they did it anyway. And still, the war didn't end for Tulle. In the 1950s, survivors pushed for official recognition. The French government issued medals. A monument was raised. But to many, it felt sterile, like flowers laid on a crime scene before the blood dried. What they wanted was justice. What they got was a treaty. France and West Germany began stitching together their post-war relationship. Trade, diplomacy, NATO. But those bonds required forgetting some things like extradition demands, like trials that never happened, like the face of Heinz Lammerding, still living comfortably in Dusseldorf, his death sentence unenforced. Protests broke out in 1953. Survivors marched. Letters were published. Editorials burned with rage. One widow held a sign. "My husband is dead. His killer lives. Is this peace?" No one answered. Even decades later, attempts to bring the perpetrators to justice fell flat. In 1984, German courts once again declined to try Lammerding, citing double jeopardy.
France protested.
Again, nothing changed. Lammerding died in 1971, never imprisoned. His funeral was attended by former Waffen-SS comrades. Some wore insignia. Some gave speeches. None were interrupted. The French government made no official comment. The town of Tulle issued a brief statement. "We remember. The weight didn't just fall on the dead. It fell on the ones who lived too long. Children grew into men with names no one wanted to say out loud. Some changed theirs. Some drank. A few followed their fathers into the woods, not as soldiers but as shadows. One man, a grandson of a hanged mechanic, joined the French Foreign Legion in 1965, served in Algeria. He said later, "I joined to forget. I fought to remember." He kept a rope in his footlocker. Not for use, just to never forget the shape of it. There's no parade for vengeance. No medals for pain repaid in silence. But there is a cost. And in Tulle it's still being paid. Every June. Every year. Quietly. The lampposts are new now. Modern steel. Clean lines.
No rust. No road burns.
In the heart of Tulle, the town square has been rebuilt. Paved, painted, lit with soft halogen. The balconies that once bore bodies now hold flower boxes. And yet, if you stand there long enough, if the June wind moves just right, you can still feel it. The pause, the wait, the breath held between life and nothing. Every year they gather. Survivors, children, grandchildren, names read out loud. One by one, 99 of them, some never found, some buried nameless, some remembered only in photographs with creased corners and fading ink. They don't say justice, not anymore. They say memoir, because the truth is justice never came. Not the kind written in law books, not the kind with gavels and verdicts. The SS officers responsible for Tulle lived long, mostly free lives. Some died of old age. Some never stood trial. Some slipped into history under false names or friendly flags. And the men who hunted them, they vanished too, into stories no one wanted to write down. Into graves with no military markings, into the blank space between war and peace where grief doesn't get a monument. But memory does something that justice can't. It endures. It resists forgetting. It teaches the next generation how to look at a lamppost and see more than light. There are boys in Tulle now who ride bicycles through the square, unaware that the pavement once ran with piss and blood, that men were strung up where their tires now skid. And there are old women who still cross themselves when walking past the church corner, not for faith, but for him, for the one who never came home. And maybe that's the point. The rope wasn't just meant to kill, it was meant to silence. But the people of Tulle never let it. They remembered, they hunted, they wrote it down in ledgers, in testimonies, in scars passed down through blood and bone. The SS tried to make Tulle an example. They did. But not the way they intended. Because now, when we speak of Tulle, we don't speak of fear. We speak of cost. Of what it takes to carry 99 names through history. And what it means to never let them go. The rope is gone. But the swing still echoes. Their names were almost erased. Their killers almost walked free. But memory fought back. If you believe some stories must be remembered, like, share, and keep the rope swinging.